On a quiet stretch of Highway 84 near Valdosta, Georgia, an elderly black couple found themselves unexpectedly pulled over by two local deputies under suspicious circumstances. James and Martha Reynolds had driven this familiar road many times before, returning from a visit with their grandchildren. But that afternoon, their peaceful journey was interrupted when flashing blue lights appeared behind them. The deputies claimed it was because of a broken tail light, an excuse that James immediately questioned. Knowing both rear lights were intact, despite his calm and steady demeanor, the officer's attitude quickly shifted to condescension and impatience. James, a retired civil rights lawyer, maintained his composure as the deputies searched their vehicle without legitimate cause, rifling through bags and opening the trunk while laughing and dismissing his rights. Martha stood quietly by, dignified and unflinching, as the deputies continued their invasive search. After what felt like an eternity, the deputies handed James a citation for the supposed tail light violation and returned to their cruiser, chuckling as if the ordeal was a joke. What they didn't realize was that James was not an ordinary driver. His decades-long legal career had trained him to recognize abuse of power and respond with meticulous documentation. That routine traffic stop, meant to intimidate and humiliate, would soon become the catalyst for a powerful legal battle against misconduct and racial profiling. James and Martha were ready, not with anger or fear, but with the knowledge and resolve to hold those deputies accountable. When James and Martha Reynolds were pulled over on that quiet Georgia highway, they quickly realized the two deputies who stopped them were not just enforcing the law. They were asserting power in a way that felt deeply personal and intimidating. Deputy Mark Turner and Officer Brian Cole approached the vehicle with smirks and a casual arrogance that betrayed their belief that this elderly couple was no threat. Mark, tall and lean with mirrored sunglasses, spoke in a clipped, dismissive tone, demanding license and registration while barely disguising his annoyance at James's calm and steady responses. Brian, stockier and shorter, circled to Martha's side, ordering her to keep her hands visible with a harshness that seemed unnecessary for two peaceful travelers. Despite their decades of life experience and James's legal background, the officers treated them like suspects, their behavior laced with a subtle but unmistakable racial bias. James, a retired civil rights attorney who had dedicated his career to fighting injustices, recognized immediately that this was not a routine traffic stop. The deputies laughed amongst themselves as they rifled through the car, opening bags and the trunk without probable cause, enjoying the power they wielded. Their condescending remarks, including references to James's smart mouth and telling Martha she looked nervous, were meant to demean and provoke. Yet James did not rise to the bait. He remained composed, quietly asserting his rights and carefully noting every detail of the encounter. He understood that the office's arrogance was born of a system that often allows law enforcement to act with impunity, especially toward black citizens. Their unchecked behavior was not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of abuse, a silent agreement among some officers that certain people could be intimidated and humiliated without consequence. But James and Martha were not just any victims. They were prepared to stand against this mistreatment. While the deputies chuckled, confident they had silenced a smart old man and his wife, they had no idea that James was already documenting their misconduct in a meticulously kept legal notebook, a habit formed over years in the courtroom. What seemed like an ordinary traffic stop was about to become the beginning of a fierce legal fight for justice, accountability, and dignity, exposing not only these two officers' misconduct but the broader systemic issues that allowed such abuses to persist unchecked. Despite the tense and disrespectful behavior of the deputies who stopped them, James Reynolds remained remarkably calm throughout the ordeal. Unlike many who might have responded with anger or panic, James knew exactly how to handle the situation. He was a retired civil rights attorney and former state prosecutor, a man who had spent decades navigating the intricacies of the law and standing up to abuses of power. From the moment Deputy Mark Turner ordered him out of the car, James maintained a steady demeanor, keeping his hands visible and responding to every question with measured clarity. He understood that showing frustration or defiance would only escalate the situation and give the officers a reason to justify their increasingly aggressive actions. Instead, he calmly challenged the basis for the stop, pointing out that their tail lights were in perfect working order, and questioned the deputies' lack of probable cause for the search. His quiet confidence irritated Deputy Turner, who was used to compliance rather than calm resistance. Turner's frustration grew, and his muttered insults, calling James a smart-mouth old man, and suggesting he should have stayed home, were intended to provoke. But James didn't flinch. Meanwhile, Officer Brian Cole searched the vehicle, rummaging through bags and the trunk without finding anything incriminating, while Martha stood by with quiet dignity. What the deputies didn't know was that James was carefully documenting every moment of this encounter, not with a phone, but in the leather-bound notebook he had carried for years, filled with detailed, time-stamped notes from his long legal career. This notebook was more than just a habit. It was his shield and weapon against abuses of power. He meticulously recorded the deputies' words, actions, and even the subtle shifts in their attitudes, knowing that this evidence could one day be crucial. When the deputies finally handed him a citation for the supposed tail light violation, James took it without argument, fully aware that the real battle was just beginning. Back at home, as they reflected on the incident, Martha remarked quietly that the deputies probably thought they could intimidate them. But James simply nodded and confirmed that every detail, every insult, every unlawful action was recorded. They weren't just writing a ticket to an old couple. They had targeted a man who knew the law and was ready to hold them accountable. James's calm in the face of provocation wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the calculated restraint of a man who understood the power of facts and documentation in seeking justice. This composure and legal knowledge set the stage for what would become a landmark case exposing not only the misconduct of two rogue officers but the broader systemic issues of racial profiling and abuse within law enforcement. Through calmness, clarity, and preparedness, James transformed a routine traffic stop into a powerful statement against injustice. After the troubling traffic stop, James Reynolds knew he couldn't simply accept what had happened. He immediately reached out to an old trusted colleague, Linda Barrett, a sharp and resourceful legal expert who had long been a champion for civil rights. James dialed her number without hesitation, recounting the details of the stop on Highway 84, the unjustified search, the dismissive and condescending behavior of deputies Mark Turner and Brian Cole, and the blatant violation of their rights. Linda listened carefully, her voice steady but concerned as she responded. "Do you have their names? Any identifying information?" James confirmed the deputies' identities, and Linda's tone shifted to one of serious determination. She explained that both Turner and Cole had been flagged before by Internal Affairs for misconduct. But, frustratingly, those complaints had been quietly dismissed by the sheriff's office without any real accountability. Linda promised to dig deeper and see what could be uncovered. This call marked the beginning of a coordinated effort to not only challenge the specific incident but to expose a pattern of systemic abuse within the department. With Linda's help, James and Martha began assembling a detailed dossier of evidence, relying not just on their own documentation but on previously hidden internal affairs reports and civilian complaints against the deputies. These documents revealed troubling histories. Turner had been suspended for excessive force during a traffic stop in a neighboring county, while Cole had a record of making discriminatory remarks during a checkpoint operation. The picture that emerged was clear. These deputies were not isolated cases but part of a recurring problem of misconduct and racial profiling. Armed with this information, James and Martha, supported by Linda, crafted a legal strategy grounded in facts and past patterns, prepared to challenge the sheriff's office's culture of silence and impunity. They knew this fight was bigger than one traffic stop. It was about holding accountable those who abused their power and ensuring that others would not suffer similarly. While the deputies laughed off the encounter at the time, oblivious to the storm brewing against them, James and Martha's alliance with Linda ensured that the truth would come to light. This partnership, forged in the pursuit of justice, turned what began as an ordinary roadside stop into a comprehensive legal battle aimed at systemic reform. Through methodical investigation and relentless commitment, they were determined to bring accountability and change to a law enforcement system too often shielded from scrutiny. James Reynolds and his wife Martha, armed with a wealth of legal knowledge and a deep commitment to justice, didn't just accept the unjust treatment they endured on that Georgia highway. Instead, they took decisive action, filing a federal complaint under Section 1983, a powerful civil rights statute designed to hold government officials accountable for violations of constitutional rights. This complaint accused deputies Mark Turner and Brian Cole of infringing upon their Fourth Amendment rights, which protect against unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as their 14th Amendment rights to due process and equal protection under the law. Drawing from his extensive legal background, James meticulously prepared the case, weaving together the detailed notes he had taken during the stop, the internal affairs records revealing the deputies' history of misconduct, and supporting evidence such as dashcam footage and mechanics reports confirming that the supposed broken tail light was in perfect condition. The filing was not just about seeking damages for themselves, it was a call for systemic accountability. James understood that the behavior they experienced was part of a broader pattern of racial profiling and abuse of power, often hidden behind the veneer of routine law enforcement actions. Together with Martha and their trusted legal ally Linda Barrett, they sought not only monetary compensation but also an injunction to change the sheriff's department's search policies to prevent future abuses. Their complaint was carefully constructed to expose the repeated misconduct of Turner and Cole, emphasizing that these deputies had not acted alone but represented a systemic failure within the local law enforcement culture. This legal move sparked significant attention, as it challenged the notion that officers could operate without consequence simply because of their badges. The Reynolds' lawsuit symbolized a larger fight for civil rights and dignity, transforming a personal encounter into a landmark case that demanded the sheriff's office confront its problematic practices. Far from a mere traffic dispute, the federal complaint served as a beacon for others who had suffered similar violations, signaling that even against entrenched systems, knowledgeable and prepared individuals could push back and seek justice. For James and Martha, the lawsuit was not about vengeance but about ensuring that future stops would be conducted with respect, fairness, and adherence to the law. The legal battle between James and Martha Reynolds and the sheriff's deputies quickly evolved from a personal fight into a cause that resonated deeply within the community. As news of their federal lawsuit spread, the courtroom where the case was to be heard became packed with a diverse crowd: friends, family, civil rights activists, local clergy, law students, and ordinary citizens who saw in the Reynolds story a reflection of their own experiences or the struggles faced by many in the community. The once quiet and procedural case was now a public forum spotlighting not only the actions of deputies Mark Turner and Brian Cole but the systemic issues surrounding racial profiling and abuse of power in law enforcement. Reporters filled the room, capturing every word, while scholars and local leaders attended to witness the unfolding fight for justice. The energy was palpable, a mix of anticipation, hope, and a demand for accountability. James, ever the seasoned attorney, stood calmly before the judge, his presence commanding respect not through volume but through the weight of his words and the undeniable strength of the evidence he presented. He spoke not just for himself and Martha, but for everyone who had ever been unfairly targeted or intimidated by those sworn to protect and serve. The deputies, once confident and dismissive, now sat uneasily as the courtroom shifted its focus onto their conduct and history. Testimonies and evidence painted a vivid picture of repeated misconduct and violations of civil rights. The crowd's reaction was quiet but unmistakable. Each fact and testimony chipped away at the facade of impunity that had shielded the deputies and the department. The case transcended the specifics of a traffic stop. It became a public reckoning with the culture and practices that allowed such incidents to occur unchecked. Community leaders spoke of the importance of visibility and vigilance in confronting institutional injustice. Law professors and students took detailed notes, recognizing the case as a significant example of legal advocacy in action. For many attending, the courtroom became a symbol of hope that the law could serve as a tool to challenge and change entrenched systems. Even officers in the audience, some off-duty and others quietly observing from the back, seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the moment. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case would not simply end with a verdict about a single incident but would ignite conversations and efforts aimed at reforming policing policies and ensuring that dignity and rights were respected for all citizens. The Reynolds' courageous stand had galvanized a community and reminded everyone watching that justice is possible when individuals use knowledge, perseverance, and the power of collective attention to hold authority accountable. In the courtroom, James Reynolds displayed the very essence of his decades-long legal expertise as he methodically dismantled the defense's claims against him and his wife, Martha. Unlike many who might rely on emotional appeals, James focused on presenting facts, evidence, and a clear narrative that exposed the truth behind the deputies' misconduct. When it was his turn to speak, he rose with a quiet authority, capturing the attention of everyone present, not through volume or theatrics, but through the precision and calmness of his words. He began by recounting the events of that day with measured clarity, emphasizing the violation of their constitutional rights and the broader implications of such abuses of power. Using the dashcam footage, James illustrated that their taillights were fully functional, contradicting the deputies' justification for the stop. He carefully referenced the signed mechanic's report verifying the car's condition, demonstrating that there was no legitimate reason for the search. Throughout the trial, James skillfully introduced a wealth of evidence, including dispatch call logs that revealed no probable cause was reported prior to the stop, undermining the deputies' claim of a lawful basis for their actions. He also presented multiple prior civilian complaints against deputies Mark Turner and Brian Cole, revealing a troubling pattern of misconduct and racial bias that had previously been ignored or dismissed by the sheriff's office. Each piece of evidence was meticulously tied together, creating an unassailable case that exposed not only the unlawful search and seizure but also a culture of impunity within the department. When Deputy Turner was called to the stand, James's questioning was deliberate and unrelenting, calmly pressing him to explain inconsistencies in his testimony and the department's policies. The deputy's discomfort was palpable as James confronted him with his own recorded words, insults and unjustified suspicions that had been carefully documented in James's leather-bound notebook during the stop. Similarly, Officer Cole's evasive answers and prior disciplinary records further eroded the defense's credibility. The courtroom, once filled with procedural formalities, had transformed into a stage where truth and accountability took center stage. Observers noted the shift in energy as the crowd leaned forward, engaged by James's methodical approach and the undeniable evidence laid before them. His ability to maintain composure while exposing the deputies' falsehoods demonstrated the power of clarity and preparation over anger or theatrics. By the time he sat down, it was clear that the defense's narrative had crumbled. James had not only defended himself and Martha but had shone a light on systemic issues in law enforcement, proving that justice can be pursued with dignity, precision, and unwavering commitment to the facts. After days of intense testimony and careful examination of evidence, the court reached a decisive ruling that sent a clear message about accountability and justice. Judge Marissa Caldwell, presiding over the case, delivered her verdict in favor of James and Martha Reynolds, recognizing the deputies' actions as violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. The judgment was not merely symbolic, it came with significant consequences. Deputies Mark Turner and Brian Cole were suspended without pay pending a formal internal review, a rare disciplinary action that underscored the severity of their misconduct. Moreover, the Lawrence County Sheriff's Office was ordered to issue a public apology acknowledging the wrongful search and abuse of power. Perhaps most notably, the court awarded the Reynolds couple $125 in damages. a tangible acknowledgement of the violation of their rights and the emotional toll of the incident. The judge's ruling was firm and unequivocal, emphasizing that badges do not grant immunity from accountability. Her words resonated through the courtroom as she reminded everyone present that no one is above the law. The courtroom was filled with murmurs of approval from the supporters who had gathered to witness the historic moment. For Turner and Cole, the verdict was a devastating blow. They sat silently, their faces taut with disbelief and frustration, while Sheriff Douglas Grant, who had attempted to downplay the incident in the early stages, quietly exited the courtroom before the ruling was announced. The ruling rippled beyond the courtroom walls, becoming a catalyst for wider discussions on policing policies and systemic reform within the Sheriff's Department. Local media covered the story extensively, highlighting the significance of the verdict as a rare victory against abuses of authority, especially in cases involving racial profiling and unlawful searches. For James and Martha, the outcome was bittersweet. While they did not seek revenge, the judgment represented a hard-fought victory in their pursuit of dignity and justice. Sitting together on their porch back home, James reflected on the ruling, acknowledging that while the decision might not immediately change the entire system, it sent a powerful signal to those in law enforcement that misconduct would no longer be tolerated without consequence. Martha, ever the steady partner, agreed quietly, emphasizing that accountability was the first step toward meaningful change. The couple understood that this case was not the end but rather the beginning of a broader movement to hold public officials responsible and to protect the rights of all citizens. Their story inspired others who had faced similar injustices to come forward, creating a ripple effect that challenged the status quo and encouraged communities to demand transparency and fairness from those sworn to serve them. In the end, the court's ruling affirmed a fundamental truth: justice must be accessible to everyone, regardless of age, race, or status, and when it is, it has the power to shine a light on even the darkest corners of power. The victory in court was a defining moment for James and Martha Reynolds. But for them, it was far more than just a personal win. It was a call to action. The incident had exposed deep-rooted problems in law enforcement practices, and the couple knew that real change required sustained effort beyond the courtroom. Motivated by a shared commitment to justice, James and Martha decided to channel their experience into creating a lasting legacy that could help others facing similar injustices. With the support of Linda Barrett, their trusted legal ally, they began laying the groundwork for a nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal aid to underserved rural communities disproportionately affected by unjust policing. Named the Liberty Justice Initiative, the organization would offer legal counsel, representation, and education for individuals who otherwise lacked access to such resources. Martha, who had once served as a judge and carried the weight of the gavel with grace and wisdom, dusted off her old judicial nameplate and briefcase, symbolizing a return to service, not in the courtroom, but as an advocate for systemic change. James, energized by the courtroom battle and the outpouring of community support, took on the role of mentor and educator, sharing his knowledge and experience with law students and young attorneys. Together, they envisioned a future where legal tools were accessible to all and where communities could stand strong against abuses of power. Their nonprofit was not about changing the entire world overnight but about leveling the playing field for those who had been consistently marginalized and silenced. The Liberty Justice Initiative would focus on rural and low-income areas where legal aid was scarce, addressing cases of racial profiling, unlawful searches, and other civil rights violations. This new chapter in James and Martha's lives was fueled by a deep understanding that their fight was part of a larger struggle for justice and equity. They recognized that their courtroom victory was only the beginning, a spark that could ignite broader awareness and mobilization. As word spread about their efforts, local leaders, activists, and even some former critics began to rally around the initiative, seeing it as a practical and hopeful step toward reform. Meanwhile, James and Martha continued living their lives with quiet determination. knowing that meaningful change often unfolds slowly but steadily. Their story, once confined to a traffic stop and courtroom, now extended into classrooms, community centers, and public forums, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and use the law as a tool for justice. Through their nonprofit, they aim to create not only immediate assistance for victims but also long-term shifts in the culture of policing and public accountability. What began as an unfortunate encounter on a back road had blossomed into a movement rooted in resilience, knowledge, and hope, proof that when ordinary people take extraordinary steps, they can indeed shape a fairer and more just society for generations to come. The story of James and Martha Reynolds quickly transcended the confines of the courtroom, resonating far beyond their immediate community and sparking conversations about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up to systemic abuse. Their case became a beacon of hope and inspiration for many who had faced similar challenges but felt powerless to act. Media coverage, including local news reports and in-depth podcasts, amplified their experience, highlighting the broader issues of racial profiling, police misconduct, and the often overlooked rights of everyday citizens. One particular podcast episode titled, "When the Wrong People Get Stopped," climbed the charts not because it was sensational or flashy, but because it told a raw, honest story of power dynamics, legal strategy, and quiet courage. The Reynolds story reached classrooms where law students dissected the case as a prime example of effective legal advocacy and the pursuit of civil rights. It inspired activists who saw in James and Martha's calm yet resolute approach a model for challenging entrenched systems. Even beyond the legal and activist circles, their experience touched ordinary people grappling with their own fears and frustrations regarding law enforcement interactions. A particularly poignant moment came when James received a handwritten letter from a young person, inspired by the case, expressing a desire to pursue law school and fight for justice in their own community. This personal connection underscored the ripple effect of the Reynolds' courage, how one act of resistance can ignite the hopes and ambitions of others. At home, James and Martha continued their routines. Early mornings filled with strong coffee and long conversations on the porch. Reflecting on the journey that had transformed their lives, they often pondered the law's nature, how it is sometimes described as blind. Yet in reality, it may see only what it is allowed to see until someone pushes it to look deeper. Their case had forced that deeper look, exposing uncomfortable truths and demanding accountability. The couple recognized that their victory was just a step in a much longer journey toward justice and equity. But they took solace in knowing that their story was now part of a larger narrative. It was a story about resilience, about the power of knowledge, and about how standing firm with dignity and facts can challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. The Reynolds experience reminded all who heard it that silence never changes anything. But stories, carefully told and courageously lived, can move mountains. Through their example, countless others found the courage to speak up, demand fairness, and believe in the possibility of change. The story of James and Martha Reynolds teaches us a profound lesson about the power of resilience, knowledge, and quiet courage in the face of injustice. Life often places us in situations where the odds seem stacked against us, where those meant to protect and serve instead abuse their power, and where fear and anger might feel like the only natural responses. Yet, James and Martha show us that true strength lies not in shouting louder or fighting with fury, but in calm clarity, unwavering dignity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Their journey reminds us that justice is not handed to us on a silver platter, it is earned through preparation, patience, and the courage to stand firm even when the world expects us to bow. Sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought with raised voices or fists but with quiet confidence and meticulous documentation, the tools of wisdom shaped by years of experience and a deep belief in what is right. This story resonates beyond a courtroom or a traffic stop. It is about every person who has ever felt powerless or invisible. It is a call to all of us to remember that silence rarely changes anything. But when we tell our stories, seek knowledge, and stand together with dignity, we become unstoppable forces for change. If there is one thing to take away from James and Martha's journey, it is this: your voice matters, your rights matter, and your fight for justice, no matter how daunting, can inspire others and ripple out to create real transformation. We invite you to reflect on this powerful story and consider the moments in your own life where courage and clarity can make a difference. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where standing firm changed your path? Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs today. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories that empower and uplift, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can learn, grow, and build a community that believes in justice, dignity, and hope. Remember, change begins with each of us taking that first brave step.